Thank you for joining me today for the Healthy AF podcast. With me is Dr. Stephen Hussey. Stephen, thank you for joining me again. You were a guest on my last podcast, talking about this book initially.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here.
Absolutely, because you had an update on this book, and you hadn't quite finished it when we first talked. I think you were just finishing it up, and then you had an event that caused you to come back and kind of take another little more information in the book. So from a different perspective or an added perspective. So should we start there? Talk about that?
Yeah, sure. Definitely. I mean, just give you some background. As a kid, I had a lot of inflammatory chronic conditions. And I was very sick as a kid. And so, I'm happy to say that through my lifestyle change over my life, I've been able to get rid of most of those, aside from type 1 diabetes, which happened when I was 9 years old as a result of that inflammation that I had. And so, I was told when I was a kid all the way going to see endocrinologists that, I was heavily predisposed to heart disease, because of type 1 diabetes. My blood sugars will never be the same as someone without. Even though I have very control, there's still going to be, it's harder to regulate, keep them regulated. So I'm predisposed. So I've done a lot of research into the heart and heart disease because, throughout my medical education and my master's degree and everything, and just my own personal research, really. Most of what I learned has been my own personal research, not formal education about the heart anyways. And so I've spent a lot of time, researching the heart, and, I had all this information, and I was writing this book that is now Understanding the Heart, which is out. Probably a month or two before I finished the self-published version, I had a cardiac event. I had a widowmaker heart attack where a random clot formed. When they went in, I had no atherosclerosis anywhere in my coronary arteries, just a giant clot formed and blocked my left anterior descending artery, and it sent me to the hospital. And so, I did a talk on my YouTube channel, which is Resource Your Health, that fully explains everything that I think happened and why that happened to me. But in the kind of in a nutshell, it was high amounts of stress. I mean, I'm heavily predisposed as a type 1, very high amounts of stress at the time leading up to it. And then a day and a half before I had the event, I got probably the most stressful news of my life. And it was the inability to do anything about that news, to help that person that the news was about. Me or anybody in my family couldn't get to that person and help them, at least in immediate. So, it was that out of control feeling that led to this very, stressed out state. And then I probably unwisely, the morning I had the heart attack, tried to do a very intense workout in that state of stress. And there's plenty of evidence that at the wrong time, an intense workout, probably the most intense workout I've ever done in my life, I was doing at that time. I was doing these intense workouts. That was what I was doing. And so I just tried to do that normally. That morning, I should have smartly took it more easy, based on that state of stress that I was in. And then this clot formed, and, I went and, they busted the clot and placed a stent, which I could argue they didn't need to place a stent, but, maybe that's for later on. So I was sitting there and I was pretty defeated, pretty, demoralized, having have done all this research and knowing all this knowledge, and then having an event myself. And I had almost decided I wasn't going to release the book, that I was a hypocrite and I couldn't do this. And then, as I write about in the introduction to the book, my experience in the hospital and the care that I got and the recommendations I was given changed my mind, drastically, because it was horrendous. Based on what I knew, what the research shows, now I was seeing firsthand, wow, this is wrong. I'm going to be back here in 2 months if I followed their recommendations. They prescribed 11 different medications while I was there. They told me to eat junk food diet. They told me that if I didn't rest, have medications, and time, that I would develop heart failure, hands down. And I knew a lot of this stuff to be false. And so I did not take the recommendations. And I decided, I did my own healing protocol when I got home, and I'm happy to say my heart's 100% recovered. It's conducting electrical signal perfectly fine, no signs of heart failure. Everything's good. Ejection fraction's normal. So everything's good there. And they were astounded that, at my 3-month echocardiogram that it was normal. Happy about that. But then I decided, yes, I should release the book because, unfortunately, there's going to be people who experience the same thing I did. And having the right information is what allowed me to make decisions that I think ended up being better for me in the long run. I didn't heed my own advice in the short term and ended up with this event, but the information's out there because the information in my book is not about being right or wrong. It's not about proving the establishment is wrong or whatever. It's about opening the conversation and saying, hey, let's find the actual causes of these and prevent them, And so the information in my book is just laying out information to say, hey, this is out here. Maybe this is right. Maybe this is wrong. Maybe there's more to it, but let's start having the right conversation so we can actually get to the best answers instead of just shutting it down. Cause that was the most disturbing thing in the hospital. It wasn't the recommendations. Everything is contrary to what they thought. Conversation was shut down. They didn't want to talk about it. So that was kind of my experience. It's why I'm so interested in the heart. It's why I've even delved even deeper into even what I put in the book, because this happened to me. And I found a lot of stuff since that happened, that has just furthered my opinions and my research. And so I'm trying to share it.
That's fantastic. Yeah. That's a vulnerable place to be. And the timing of it was pretty poignant when you were just released. So, but I think that edition really gave it some, personal, a personal experience of coming through this difficulty, coming through to the other side of it. And so you're really not speaking theoretically so much anymore, but you're actually speaking firsthand. And so a more, it's a touch of the real, the real experience. And that makes it more personal. And what you're saying is really, like you said, it's a conversation that no one's having because the conversation has been closed as far as the establishment goes. And anything new is just basically, let's add another med or add another, every time something new comes on, like about cholesterol or about plaque then they just find another way to find another treatment or another protocol, another way to justify. It just keeps lumping on instead of, as you said, get to the root of it, like what is actually causing these issues. So to continue to find new ways to treat symptoms. So, so the book, Understanding the Heart, for those who want to see it, it's on paperback. Obviously it's an Audible, and you definitely want to put it on your list because it'll make you question everything you've probably heard about the heart. I think let's talk about that. Let's talk about a little bit about kind of the main thesis there is that it's cholesterol being one, not bad for us, right? It's a necessary nutrient, right? But then this false sense about what causes heart attacks, like about plaque, for instance.
Yeah.
And that's where, I think your big question or big argument there is what's actually causing the clot or the blockage or I think that's where the big question is in your book. Am I right there?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, because of, the research and the theories that came out in the 50s and 60s, there's been this idea, this theory that's been heavily pushed that what causes heart disease is elevated cholesterol in the blood, or elevated LDL or elevated total cholesterol, the little things that carry the cholesterol around. And so you get a lipid panel, and that's how you assess your risk for heart disease, right? Or for atherosclerosis. And that's just been the idea. And even though that idea was, especially the idea that dietary saturated fat and cholesterol cause heart disease was heavily tested. Like 4 or 5 different big studies were done, like in the 60s and early 70s. And they all showed that the more saturated fat that you ate, the less heart disease you had. And the more polyunsaturated fat you ate, the more heart disease and risk of dying from anything people had. Yet the theory that cholesterol is causing heart disease had already taken off. And there was a lot of money behind it. A lot of money from the sugar industry, the grain industry, things like that. And from the pharmaceutical industry, who had a drug that could lower cholesterol. So if they could convince people that cholesterol caused the disease, they could prescribe a lot more drugs. And that's exactly what we see today. Statin drugs are, it goes back and forth between statin drugs and pain meds about which one's the most prescribed, in the United States. So but then when you actually look at things, in my opinion, and I've looked into the research quite a bit, there's no evidence anywhere that an LDL molecule just says, okay, I'm going to go embed myself into the lining of the artery just because that's just what I do. It's just something that I do. It's there for a reason. It's there to, carry cholesterol down so it can deliver to tissues because cholesterol is essential to the body. And so even people want to, go into the analyzing small dents and oxidized LDL and particle number, particle size, ApoB, all these different things, all these different ways we can sub-categorize different lipoproteins. Those things are just big distractions. And kind of like we were saying, before we got on, is I talked about how Einstein says you can't solve your problems with the same level of thinking that created them.
Right.
And that's exactly what people are trying to do with this lipids. We've got this narrow, myopic focus on this lipid panel. And if we just analyze lipids in the right way, it'll magically tell us if someone's at risk or not, and again, trying to analyze lipids to tell us anything is, I think, short-sighted. Same level of thinking that created the incorrect theory that lipids do cause heart disease, or they can. But it's short-sighted also because it's one element of the body, it's one molecule, and we're trying to assess that one molecule. And in this complex biological ecosystem that we are, there's no way that one thing is causing a whole entire disease process. There's so many complicating factors. There's so many different things, which is kind of takes us to this fundamental flaw of research in general. Not to say that I don't look at researchers, I'll just say I do, but it's just this flaw in research that the most ideal research is one where you eliminate all the variables and you test one thing to see if it causes one thing. And that is the best way to do an experiment. But last time I checked, that doesn't apply to life because I'm never exposed to one thing at one time. I'm always have different stimuli. So that type of research is possible, but is it instructive? Probably not, So that's the kind of more philosophical, I guess, way I think about that idea, that theory. If you want to go into, more specifics about what atherosclerosis is and things like that, we can do that as well.
So let's talk a little bit about, I know you talk about dietary factors. And of course, a big one is, because you just mentioned not looking specifically at lipids, but I want to get some clarity on one thing that you said with regards to lipids, and that is with polyunsaturated fats, which we know in high doses, which we have in our standard diet, right, of processed food, they are really coming into our system. And that's where we get the oxidized lipids, correct? We get more of those oxidized lipids and some oxidative stress, peroxidation of lipids, creating oxidative stress. So this has been kind of shown, I would say. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, definitely. So like those lipid or those fats, those polyunsaturated fats are one way that, yes, we can get higher oxidation of fats in the body and lipids because they're very inflammatory, or they can cause an inflammatory reaction or make it more likely to have an inflammatory response. But also they're just easily damaged fats because they're unsaturated. So the saturated ones are full of hydrogens, so they're very stable, whereas the unsaturated ones are more prone to heat and light oxidation. And so no matter what type of omega-3 it is, if it's unsaturated, omega-6 or whatever it is, they're all unsaturated. They're more prone to oxidation. But the omega-6s are more prone, and that's what those seed oils and things are. So they're just going to create this higher amount of oxidative stress and inflammation in the body.
Okay. And you're saying that's one factor. It's not the only factor, but you're saying that's one factor that's in our diet. Of course, there's other factors not to zero in just on them and stop, but to look at everything else. I guess that's what you're.
Yeah. There's lots of different things that can create inflammation, oxidative stress that will damage things in the body, regardless of what that is. Damage lots of things.
Mm-hmm. Okay. But so it basically comes back to oxidative stress is the culprit of some form, but it may not have one source.
So anything that will damage the ability of the body to hold on to electrons and use electrons or steal electrons. That's what's going to create this state of oxidative stress, because free radicals get a bad rap. They're talked about as these things with unpaired electrons that they want to go around and find a pair, and that's what they want to do, and they'll steal it from anywhere, and that will end up damaging tissue or damaging molecule things in the body. And that is true. If we get to this state of too many free radicals, that can be something that happens. But free radicals are very important. In their signaling molecules, they signal satiation. They help us communicate based on how many levels of free radicals your body is communicating to us about, and if we need to stop certain processes or start certain processes or what's going on in different parts of the body. Free radicals are very essential for our normal physiology. But if we get too many of them from, eating an inflammatory diet or eating a glucose-based metabolism or various things, then they can cause an issue. But there are also other things, external things, that can contribute to this this state of, I guess you could say, poor electron communication, poor electron health. The electrons in the body are not getting communicated and used the way they should be. And that could be things like heavy metals or just toxins in general. Heavy metals could be plastics, could be pesticides or herbicides, could be lots of different things that contribute to that. It could be endotoxemia, which is when we get poor dental health or poor gut health. We can have the wrong type of bacteria leaking into the bloodstream. And when the body attacks those bacteria, it uses endotoxins, and those can be very inflammatory and electron stealing. It could also be a lack of things or a lack of doing things that give us electrons, because we don't just get energy from what we eat. We do, but we also get energy from light, the sun. We get energy from the earth. If we barefoot on the earth or putting our skin to the earth, like we're getting energy in that way. And there's plenty of evidence, research that shows that. And so that's where we could get electrons, and our body's very good at using them if we put it in that right environment. So it could be a lack of doing those things that's also contributing to this poor electron flow and resulting in this oxidative stress. Because oxidative stress to me is not just about having a lot of free radicals. It's about poor management of electrons, not having enough electrons to quench those free radicals,
Gotcha.
So that's
a supply issue more than just
yeah.
So it's a supply issue of electrons, which is completely our whole lifestyle. Because free radicals happen just in the digestion of food and just turning food into energy, into ATP. We're going to have free radicals. Now and that varies based on maybe the quality of the food on some level. But it's not
plenty of evidence that carbohydrates, or like processed carbohydrates, especially using those for primary fuel source, creates more free radicals.
Right. And you mentioned the combination of PUFA, polyunsaturated fats, with carbohydrates being especially, I guess, taxing or being more inflammatory.
Yeah, definitely. So, because if your body, there's some evidence that if your body is trying to burn these polyunsaturated fats for fuel, then it's not triggering it, and it actually creates in the short term like less oxidative stress, less free radicals. But the problem with that is that it never turns off your satiation, because the oxidative stress signaling from a saturated fat turns on satiation and you stop eating. That's why you can't overeat a steak, right? You just eat steak and you just can't. But you could always eat another muffin or another chip,
right?
Because those things are full of those fuel sources that don't turn on satiation. And so then in the long run, we end up getting this terribly high amount of oxidative stress as free radicals being made, because it was just never turned off. And then we made them and they went somewhere else and they weren't signaling in that local area. And so that's what the way diet can do it. But that's why lots of times you'll see people say, oh, well, polyunsaturated fats are better. They create less oxidative stress. Like in the short term, fine. But in the long term, that's a big deal. We need free radicals. They get such a bad rap, but we need them to have proper physiology.
Correct. Right. It's the overloads. But you're on the other side of that. You're saying on the other side of the equation, we're missing our natural supply of it. We were much more outside, more worked outside, in touch with the earth, had our hands and feet in the earth, and
exactly.
had a lot more
That's
sun
the other
during
factor to overeating. It's not just we're eating the wrong foods that don't trigger satiation. We're also not getting energy from other sources. And so we're trying, like a lot of people are trying to eat enough food to get that source of electrons, right? That source of energy. So that, and instead of getting it from elsewhere, we're living in indoor environments in the wrong types of light. We're not out in contact with the earth, those types of things. And so those things are just as much a part of your diet, so to speak, as what you're eating.
So you're saying when we were bringing, I want to just make clarity for the listener, by getting electrons, that's actually by getting sun and grounding energy from the earth and pulling that charge into our body, that is actually aids in creating ATP or cellular energy. Because it brings in electrons. Okay, I just want to make sure we have that.
Yeah, so you can either harvest electrons from the chemical bonds in food, or you can directly absorb them into the connective tissue network of your body. And that's what, when we get light on the skin and we have DHA, which is an inanimate fat only found or only found in animals, then that helps the sunlight turns the light to electrons so you can use them. And then you soak up electrons directly from the earth because we're both conductive surfaces, the earth and humans. But the earth is a much bigger conductive surface and it always has more electrons. So it'll always flow toward the smaller conductive surface, which is
right. We're a positive charge compared to the earth.
Right. Yeah. So it'll always flow toward us. Because the earth is way bigger. And so, your body will take those and it will use those electrons, either from food or from these other things, sunlight, grounding, and will use those electrons to pass down the electron transport chain in the mitochondria. And that's what gives us lots of different things. That's what gives us heat. Infrared heat. That's what gives us light production in there, infrared light. That's what gives us water. It's what gives us a free radical. And then ultimately, in a different step, it will give us ATP, which is thought of as the energy currency. But I would suggest that maybe other things that is more important for doing. Yeah.
Gotcha. And that's where we kind of should get to. I guess we should transition to one of your main points in the book, and that's what we talked about originally in the first podcast, in the Hunger Hunt Feast podcast, was this concept of structured water, which takes place, which is it's seen in nature, obviously, but in our bodies that most people don't realize what it is, or easy water, or and so why don't you help unpack that, because I'm sure most people still don't understand or haven't heard of that.
Yeah.
But this easy water that plays such a role in protecting our tissues, in keeping that energy flow moving, and it's part of everything you're talking about is part of keeping that structured water in place.
Yeah. So, exactly. So that's what I kind of alluded to there with ATP. ATP's main goal is to unfold proteins in the cell. This kind of collagen network, microtubule lattice, they call it, in the cell, so that there's surface area, hydrophilic surface area for structured water, for water to structure itself on. So what do I mean by that? Everybody talks about, solid, liquid, gas, phases of water, water vapor, liquid water, ice, but there's actually kind of this fourth state that they found where it's more like a gel. It's kind of between solid and liquid. And it happens when water holds enough energy and it gets next to a water-loving surface, which all biological surfaces are water-loving, that it will actually structure itself. It'll kind of have this different conformation. Like water is H2O. This is like H3O2 is what it is. And it's more structured. It's more rigid. It's kind of like a gel. You could think of it like Jell-O. And it's really, in the research, it's called a liquid crystal. Because it has properties of a crystal, even though it's this more gel-like thing. Anyways, it plays a huge role in normal physiology. All of our cells are made up of this gel-like water. And if people doubt me, they could just take the tissue of your forearm. If you just, that's a gel, that's not liquid. No, that's not what you drink out of a glass. That's not a waterbed. That's a gel. And so that's what we're made up of. And it plays a lot of roles. Like in heart disease, in my book, I talk about how fourth phase water is incredibly important for the lining of the artery, because that's a biological surface and the water is half blood or the blood is half water. And that water will structure itself onto the lining of the artery, which forms a protective barrier, because another name for structured water is exclusion zone water. And so that's because that it structures itself in a way that nothing can really penetrate it. So you look at, like in Dr. Pollack's lab, Gerald Pollack, he's the one who's most recently done this work with water. He's shown that the protein albumin, which is the smallest protein in the blood, cannot penetrate structural water. And so anything bigger than that, we can assume will also not be able to penetrate it. So guess what's bigger than everything else? LDL, HDL, even small dense LDLs. Red blood cells are huge. Bacteria is way too big. The only thing that can penetrate it is these very small hydrated ions of minerals. They perform, it acts as this protective layer on top of the glycocalyx. And so if we have this intact structured water, then we have a protective layer for the arteries. And there's plenty of evidence that when you put yourself in environments like sunlight and grounding, but also infrared sauna, because infrared light is the energy most absorbed by water, that we get endothelial health. We get increased blood flow. You get all kinds of stuff. This health of the cardiovascular system happens because we're structuring this water in our bodies. And it's being used to create health in the vascular system. So, I could go on and on about the mechanisms of this and how it actually creates blood flow and harks off the lever of the blood and all this different stuff that fourth phase water plays a role in. But you're correct in saying that, yes, if we don't get this energy from outside, then we're going to get, we're either going to get less structured water, but also we're going to get the breakdown of that water, because the way the water forms, it's a very electronegative, because the oxygens are bigger molecules. And so it becomes this very electronegative space, which has a lot of electrons to donate. If there are lots of oxidatively stressful molecules floating around, or things that can steal electrons, they can actually break down that fourth phase water, breaking down those protections, breaking down the water in the cells. Like, there's lots of different dysfunctional things that can go on. So getting those electrons from outside helps us maintain that proper environment inside of healthy water. But also, you talked about metabolism, and here usually when I taste the metabolites, so the water that's created by the mitochondria is the perfect, structured, deuterium depleted, toxin free water. Like, that's what you want. So increased mitochondrial health was make more of this good water. So that's why cold plungers are so beneficial, because they literally drive the flow of electrons through that by use of the crude and ground fat, but also because they're creating more structured water in there. So it's kind of helping the electrons get passed on more efficiently when we do things like that. So it's pretty fascinating. It all has to do with water.
Wow. Now, I didn't realize about the cold plunge, and I hadn't associated the cold plunge with the structured water.
Mm-hmm.
That's interesting.
Because it's being made directly by mitochondria, and the cold plunge is enhancing the ability of the mitochondria to do that.
Okay. So mitochondria would be our primary source of this easy water in our bodies. And then we can help that with the type of food we eat, like any infrared light, by getting grounding and cold plunging. It all aids that process.
Yeah. You can also drink water that is more energized, right? I don't like to say drink structured water, because if you're drinking structured water, it'd be like a gel.
A gel. Yeah. You'd be choking on it. Yeah.
But you're drinking energized water. So, and water that's full of minerals as well. And it's clean. Doesn't have toxins in it. That's very important to be doing, because then the water you put in your body is more able to become that structured water once you adjust it.
Gotcha. That makes sense. Yeah. Wow. That's a lot. Ooh, boy, where to go from here? This is good stuff. So let's talk about this idea of this plaque. Let's talk about the unstructured or vulnerable plaque, and let's kind of unpack that just a little bit because you were saying in your heart condition, with your heart event, I should say cardiac event, that you have zero plaque, right? Zero hard plaque, right?
Zero hard plaque, for sure. And they didn't find any soft plaque, and they waited to the angiogram to bust up the plaque. Okay. So let me ask you about that for a second, because that is odd. Would you not say that they would put a stent in when there's just a clot that formed? They didn't find any soft plaque, because obviously they put you in the cath lab, and that's where they traditionally, that's where we find both hard and soft plaque, is or they would do some sort of, or discovery, of what's going on there and in the cath lab. And so they didn't find soft plaque, but do they not have to justify or show the need for a stent by showing pictures of plaque to the insurer? Well, so in my case, there was a clot blocking flow. I was having the cardiac event right there. So what they did was they went and they put in enzymes. And guess what? They don't put in enzymes to break up cholesterol when they go do that. They put in enzymes to break up clotting tissue, because that's what clots are. Right?
Antithrombotic.
They put in the clot busting stuff, and busted up the clot. And I could argue that no stent needed to be placed at that time, because they busted the clot. That's great. Maybe just put me in the hospital, monitor me, and see what happens, right? Because if you look at the research on elective stent placements, so these are stent placements when someone's not having a heart attack, but they go in, they do an angiogram, and they see some 50% narrowing or whatever, and they go and they place a stent. If you look at the research and there's tons of it on using that type of treatment, it does not prevent heart attacks whatsoever. If they treat those areas, then whether or not they treated them or didn't treat them, didn't matter. People had heart attacks at the same rate. So those things don't prevent heart attacks. Neither do bypass surgeries. If you look at the evidence, when they analyze whether someone had bypass surgery or didn't, people had heart attacks at the exact same rate. They're not preventing anything. So in that case, people will say, yeah, but in an acute situation, stents are life-saving. And I said, well, if you bust the clot, that's what's life-saving because then the blood flow is restored. Whether or not you place a stent, I think, could potentially be irrelevant. We just don't know the answer. But based on the fact that placing stents in other situations doesn't help whatsoever, I would argue that that doesn't help at all. And it puts a foreign body in me that I don't really want there, which I can't do anything about now. If we can avoid that, then that would be a good thing. I do know that when I looked at the hospital bill, placing that stent immediately made the hospital $25,000. So that could be an incentive. The other thing is that it's probably the standard of care. So when that, individual cardiologist is there assessing what he should do, he knows what the standard of care is. And if he doesn't do the standard of care and something happens to me, that falls back on him. Right. So that's just the way the system is set up. I'm not saying that anybody's evil there. I'm just saying that that's the way the system's set up. Make the hospital as much money as possible because that's what you're supposed to do, and do the standard of care, which is also what you're supposed to do. So it's not the individuals necessary in that instance. It's the system that is not, to me, based on research. But regardless, I'm incredibly thankful that something was done and I'm still here, right? Obviously, I'm not mad about that.
Right.
But I'm just, investigating and critiquing the process to see if we can improve it for the better quality of patients long term. So
you're saying standard of care, regardless of whether there's plaque, standard of care or plaque, regardless of whether there is plaque present in that area, standard of care is if there's a clot, they can put a stent in.
Well, I guess the standard of care in a cardiac event would be do that. Yeah.
Of any cardiac
event. Open up
Yeah.
the artery after that. They put it in there and it kind of expands and that opens up the artery.
Right.
And maybe that is. I'm not an individual cardiologist. Maybe that is exactly what you have to do in that instance, but I don't know. Because
I think the understanding though is that if they put in a stent, it's because there's plaque that's causing a blockage rather than just a clot has now been, basically disintegrated. And there's a clear path now. There's no stenosis.
Right.
So now we should still put a stent in. That would seem odd.
You could clearly pause for a second after you busted the clot and say, okay, what's the state of this? Do you think you need this or not? But here's the other thing. So again, when people go in and have elective stents placed, or they go in and have an angiogram and they say, okay, here's a 50% blockage, here's a 70% blockage, here's an 80% blockage. We're going to go in and we're going to stent this, right? We're going to open it back up. When you look at those procedures, they don't prevent heart attacks at all. There's literally no difference between whether someone got that stent or didn't. Why? It's because those things don't cause heart attacks. That gradual restriction of an artery or narrowing of an artery doesn't cause heart attacks, because there's research by this guy named Giorgio Beraldi. He was an Italian scientist, and he did these experiments called plastic cast studies, where he made this plastic cast of hearts. He did these autopsies over his career, probably did thousands of them. And when people go to the Animal Inside Out or the Body World exhibits and they see those casts of the arterial system, he invented that procedure on how to do that. So he did it with hearts. And he found that when he did this, on people who had heart attacks or didn't have heart attacks or whatever, he found that anywhere someone had a 70% or more narrowing of an artery, that the body had built a network of collaterals that totally bypass that itself. These collateral arteries are small, so they don't necessarily show up on the angiogram, but there's tons of them. So they fully compensate the area with blood, which means that explains to us why the stent procedures and the bypass surgeries don't work, because the body has already created a bypass. So doing another one's not really going to help. If you don't fix the mechanisms of why this stenosis is there, then it's not really going to help that much. Right. So that's why those procedures don't work, because the body's already taken care of it. And I've had cardiologists tell me that some people have collateral, some people don't, or that sometimes they don't form fast enough. And in my case, if it's an instant clot like that, not going to be fast enough.
Right.
Nothing is going to be. However, if it's a gradual stenosis, I found studies that these arteries can form within 4 days. these collateral arteries, and enough
potentially
of them,
within 4 days. That's not
yeah.
standard, but potentially within we know that it can happen within a 4-day.
Well, this is what they did. They did it in animals. So I know that in animals, where they gradually produced a stenosis over 4 days up to 100% blockage, and the animal fully compensated it in that 4 days.
Wow.
Yeah. So, and then there's another one that showed that 7 days, was their average. They gradually did it over 7 days, and it was able to do that over 7 days. So pretty quick, right? So, and then that paper, we talked about the myth of the vulnerable plaque, shows that even if those narrowings are happening, those stenosis are happening, we're getting this buildup of clotting tissue that's narrowing the artery, then even if a piece of that ruptures, the vast majority of the time, that does not cause a heart attack. This was a paper called The Myth of the Vulnerable Plaque, and it looked at all the evidence on this theory and basically concluded that treating these things with stents and treating these stenosed areas are not worth it because even when they do rupture, they don't cause heart attacks. It's just, they rupture and a little injury happens and then that more clotting tissue forms on it. And if it keeps happening, then it narrows the artery more and more and more, but then the body just builds collaterals around it. So we're totally focused on those. And in that paper, if you read it, it says that rather than thrombotic factors, that should be, right? That's exactly what the paper says, because they realize that this is not caused by cholesterol. It's not caused by plaque necessarily. It's caused by clotting. And if clotting happens that's big enough, like in my case, it will block an artery, but it's acute and it happens very quickly. There was no atherosclerosis in my body. It's just, I got to a position where I created this very inflammatory state. Lots of clotting factors were increased and boom, a clot formed in it and it blocked the artery.
Once again, in the flow of the blood, not from a stenosis, not from a plaque, it's just no plaques are present.
Right.
It formed, it didn't because something broke off, it formed in the middle of a flow, was not hitting any sort of plaque.
Well,
it was just big enough to block.
Right. So here's the thing is that the other thing, if it's inflammation and things like that, was increase in clotting factors. But the other thing that can heavily contribute to whether or not this happens is stagnant blood, is interruptions in flow, turbulent flow. And so that's where these stenoses can become relevant because they are changing flow. Like if you see like a tube and then there's something on the side of the tube like this, it's changing the way it flows, right? It's creating like it flows past that. It creates like an eddy on the other side, right?
Gotcha.
So that can create more stagnant flow, but I didn't have any of that present. So there's a reason that when I've talked to cardiac surgeons and the vast majority of the time, we see these clots form in an area of a bend in the artery,
correct?
Right? Which is where there's more turbulence, there's more stagnant blood potentially. So that's why. So it's inflammation, increased clotting factors, and then these areas where there's turbulent flow, which is why increasing blood flow is so important. That's why we see when people are stagnant on airplanes or they're laying in a hospital bed, what do we see? Clotting.
Clotting,
that's what happens, right? And also on airplanes, they're very far from the earth. It's a magnetic field, which is one thing that creates flow. So lots of different things, lots of different factors there. But yeah, so we're totally attacking the wrong thing. Everybody's focused on cholesterol, treating these lesions, whatever. And we really would be like, okay, we need to increase blood flow. We need to decrease inflammation, oxidative stress, and we need to create heal the artery with structured water, like lining it. That's what we need to do. That's the approach we should be taking based on everything I found. Now, here's the kicker. So anyway, I know we didn't talk about this, but so when they went in there to bust the clot and break this in, they went into the artery in my leg, kind of in my groin, to do that. And when they took the devices out, they had to seal my artery with a device called the AngioSeal, which they use that just because it allows the artery to heal faster, so I don't have to lay on my back as long, right? Because then that increases risk of clotting for people. Probably people, not people like me, but other people that could increase risk of clotting. So they use that device. However, that device, here's the tube, it sits kind of on the inside of the artery, right? So it changes blood flow, right? It's going to affect it as it's going by. There's something that it's hitting. And so what happened, and there's evidence for this, is that as blood flows past there into my leg, it creates kind of this turbulent flow and it can lead to clotting. And that's what happened to my leg, my upper, in my thigh, my inner thigh. There's an artery there that I developed some atherosclerosis. So 2 months after my heart attack, I'm doing my normal stuff. I'm just walking on a treadmill actually at that point, and my calf starts killing me, my foot, because I'm not getting blood flow to it. I thought I had something else. I was like, oh, I'm just out of shape or something. I don't know. But my calf starts killing me. And then I figure out that, yeah, I've got this thing. And I looked into why. And the vascular surgeon was like, well, no, that's not why it is. And I was like, well, I literally did a super intense workout the morning before my heart attack and my leg was fine. Then this thing gets put in there. It's on this leg, not the other one, so this is what's causing it. And so I developed this stenosis, and it was at one point the Doppler test said it was 75 to 99% blocked. So I was getting less blood flow. So I was trying to increase collaterals, but I know collaterals can form in coronary arteries because that's where all the studies are done on them. And I know they can form in other spots, but I don't know how fast and things like that. But anyways, I used infrared light. I started using a sauna way more than I was. And I've done that since the heart attack. I started doing grounding, and I had used some enzymes and things like that. And I completely reversed it. It is gone. So
there's no more block.
There's no more atherosclerosis. The last test I had was 3 months ago, and it says that it's normal, absolutely normal.
You reversed atherosclerosis in the artery in your leg.
Yeah. Yeah. And so the vascular surgeon that I go see was just like, well, we can't say it's better because these things don't get better. And I was like, well, you just saw the test, And then the second time I got the test.
We're talking about hard plaque here. We're talking about like a CAC score, but like that kind of scan, right? That you did on the.
Well, I don't know if it was hard or soft. Because when they measured the Doppler ultrasound, they're looking at ultrasound, they're looking at flow. And so they're seeing that when flow changes, they know that there's something there. They don't know exactly what.
So it had a reduced flow of 75 to 90%. And then when he came back, there was no reduced flow.
Well, then I got the test a year later after doing this, and it said less than 50%. And then 3 months ago, I got this last one, and it was normal.
So over like a 2-3 year period.
Yeah. And it could have been sooner than that. It's just when I got the test done. Because I couldn't.
That's still significant.
Run. I couldn't run. I couldn't walk fast to an airport at the time.
And my gosh!
Now I can hike just fine. I played soccer the other day, and it's fine. So my leg doesn't hurt at all. Besides the usual muscle.
That's amazing.
So
that's amazing.
So yeah, I mean, and that just goes to show that it works. So my ability to heal the heart after the heart attack without doing any of their recommendations, and then I just healed afterwards with a simple leg. It just goes to show that what I'm talking about works. And there's tons of research to reflect that it does. It's just not being talked about anywhere. It's just why I put the book out there, even though I've even discovered more things since the book and more to add to that till more solidifies this. But yeah, it's just a shame to me. So it's why I'm out here talking about it.
Absolutely. I appreciate it. Stephen, this is stuff. I'm loving this. I'm so loving this. This is like some of the questions I've had after reading your book, and we're digging into a little deeper. I love it. So I'm trying to figure out where to begin with let's talk about post. A little bit about your experience post procedure in the hospital, and your experience with the doctor, what they're recommending for you to do versus what you understood. And a little bit of that conversation, just to show what you mean by kind of, when you start, kind of questioning what you're being recommended, like medications and so forth, versus what you found that they didn't understand what your understanding of, like, for instance, using certain supplements, certainly, just lifestyle factors. Let's get into that a little bit. Yeah. So right after your procedure, they're coming to you. You mentioned they have 11 different medications. They're feeding you processed food. And you have some questions for the doctor.
Yeah. So yeah, there's a lot of different things here. So, a lot of the medications, like 11 sounds really bad, and it is really bad, but there was like 5 of them that wanted to be on this that I'd probably be on for the rest of my life. There was a blood thinner, baby aspirin, 2 different blood pressure medications, and Stent. They wanted me on those the rest of my life. Mm-hmm. And then there was other things they wanted to give me for various things, like while I was in the hospital or whatever. But yeah, so, they were asking me, they were telling me about the aspirin, they were telling me about the blood thinner and stuff. And they assumed that I had questions about it because of cost and I could afford it. I was like, that's not why. And I was like, what about magnesium? And he was like, what about it? It's like, I know that if you tested your blood and it's low, you should take some. And I was like, well, I mean, like as a blood thinner. And he was like, magnesium's not a blood thinner. And I was like, I know that to be false, directly false. But I meant like in the sense of, could I use that instead of a drug to thin the blood? Because I I did take a blood thinner for 6 months because the stent was in there, and I didn't know
Right.
how my body was going to react to the stent. They wanted me on it forever, but I took it for that long, and I haven't taken anything since. But not that I'm saying do that, people. I'm saying that's what I decided to do based on my knowledge.
Correct.
And then, do that.
Your particular risk factors. Yeah.
Yeah. So then I looked up and I found, like, I'm sitting in the hospital doing nothing. So I looked up some studies and stuff and found that magnesium intravenously is definitely just as effective as preventing a clot after stent placement as any other, blood thinner, like pharmaceutical blood thinner. Now I didn't expect them to say, oh yeah, let's do that instead, because there's no protocol for that. That's not the standard of care. And they're all doing the standard of care because that's what's going to not get them sued.
Right.
So I didn't expect that from them, but I just, it just shows that it's all based on the money-driven side of things, and magnesium is not profitable. It's not as profitable as taking a blood thinner. So that's what the standard of care is. And there's no protocol for intravenous magnesium during that time. And then, the biggest thing for me in the hospital, the most frustrating thing is I kind of expected the other stuff. The most frustrating thing was that they would not let me manage my blood sugars. I've been doing it for 25 years, and my A1C is great for a type 1 diabetic. And they know that I have the control, yet they were insistent that they do it, which was totally different from the way I do it, the way I administer insulin and manage my blood sugars. I was like, you just let me do it. And they're like, no, we can't let you administer your own drugs or whatever. And I was like, but my blood sugar is over 300 and you won't fix it because you can't do it on your protocol. Like let me do it, and they wouldn't let me. So eventually this was during COVID, a friend of mine, drop off a bag of clothes, but it had my insulin in it so that I could get that and I could do it myself. And so I started doing that. But that was frustrating.
I'm sure
everything I had, I was supposed to be healing and my blood sugar's
300. So inflammation just flowing through your veins, which you just,
And so, and plus
sticky blood.
Food. I ended up doing mostly just fasting while I was there because the food was terrible. But, so then I started asking what the medications, because I just had a heart attack, and I valued their opinion. I wanted to know what they thought and why they wanted to use it. But it was like pulling teeth getting them to explain to me why they wanted me on these medications. What is this going to do for me? And I think I knew what their answers were, but I wanted to hear from them. I wanted to know. And so they were like, well, the blood pressure medications are so that we can take pressure off your heart so you don't develop heart failure. And I was like, oh, that makes sense. However, there are much better ways to do that than taking a blood pressure medication that's going to deplete me of minerals. And so, I knew that sauna would be the best thing to do for heart failure, infrared sauna and light and grounding. So, that's what I did after I left. But, so I was like, okay, that's why they want me on that. So I'll have to take those. And I knew that, I wasn't going to take the statins ever because that doesn't work at all. And cholesterol is not what causes heart disease. And so, and then, a nurse from, the heart failure clinic or whatever, cardiac rehab came in and told me that kind of about cardiac rehab and I had to do that, and told me that I had to take medications. That's just what you got to do, else you're going to develop heart failure. And then another nurse came in to talk to me about diet. And, the diet to prevent heart failure from this damage to my heart was a low salt, low fat diet. That's what you had to eat. And she gave me this list of foods that I could eat. It was vegetable oils were on there. There was cookies and crackers and fig Newtons and, lean protein and this kind of stuff.
Right.
Some soy stuff. And I was like, I literally said to her, I was like, this is the diet that creates heart disease. She was just like, what? And everything was low salt. And
right.
There's studies out there that I talk about in my book that shows that low salt causes heart disease and causes insulin resistance and makes heart failure worse, things like that. So it was just totally opposite of what the image was. And then the day that I was released, a new doctor came in, which was also a big problem. So I was always, based on shifts, I was always seeing a new doctor that would come in and just do the rounds and stuff. And, he came in, this is the first time I'd seen him. And he said, well, I'm not going to talk to you about medications because you've already made up your mind. And I was just like, well, I still do have some questions, and he was just like, well, we'll just release you today. And I was like, okay. It was just like, which was fine. I wanted to get home and do my thing anyways, but it was just, again, just shut down a conversation. Are you not curious as to why I don't want to take the medications? Are you not willing to, like, it was clear that somebody in my chart notes branded me as non-compliant. And so they didn't want to deal with me. They had somewhere else to be. And that was just the case, and again, shame on them for not being curious and not, wanting to help me in the way that I want to be helped and kind of figuring out what's best for me. But I understand what system they're in. I know that, they're giving a cookie cutter recipe, and if that doesn't work, or if it doesn't work, or someone's not willing to follow it, then they don't know what to do. They're literally ignorant and to what to do and how to do things differently. So I get it. But it was experiencing everything firsthand. It was very interesting, and I knew what to expect, but having the experience itself almost made me more credible, and drove me to dive even deeper. And the things I've found since, which a lot I added to the book and some I found after the book was published, but are just further confirming my ideas. And I'm living proof now. Now I've cured these things myself, as far as like prevented damage to my heart, prevented heart failure from that happening, and cured arthrosis in my legs. So I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't need any more free time. And some people want more, then they can try and find it. I don't get any more.
That's amazing. Yeah. Well, so thank you for sharing that. Cause that is your experience. And I'm still kind of spinning over the reversing the atherosclerosis in your leg. That's fantastic. Through all your lifestyle factors, not a medication at all. And there's kind of a real trend now with certain doctors we're looking at. So for a long time, we did CAC scores. We're looking at hard plaque. Atherosclerosis is the hardening of plaque. That's the heart disease, right? That's the heart disease we're trying to prevent. It causes issues with blood pressure and the expansion and contraction of the blood vessel. And now there's this sudden fear, and we touched on this with the myth of the vulnerable plaque paper. There's a sudden fear of the soft plaque, which before was not an issue, but now that there's this course some new technology out that can, without going to a cath lab, you'll get a scan and find this soft plaque, so-called soft plaque. And the soft plaque is the same as if I'm under the thin cap from thrombose, or what are those called? I'm talking about the TCH.
Let's talk about it, like clotting factors, right?
Yeah. I'm sorry. Let me see. It's a thin cap. I'm gonna have to look this up here because I want to get this right. Fibroadenoma. Yeah, that's it. Sorry. And it's TCF.
Yeah.
And I was trying to make sure I didn't mispronounce that word, but so that's the soft plaque. They're talking about thin cap fibroadenoma in the paper. They're talking about what's called the soft plaque that everyone's scanning for. So those are the same, correct? Where it's an unstable plaque is what they'll call it, right? And they're worried about these things breaking off and causing clots. So they want to now stabilize them with a statin, because a statin doesn't just reduce the production of cholesterol. It actually hardens soft plaque, correct?
Yeah.
Does that in itself sound more dangerous to you than soft plaque?
Yeah. Well, hard plaque is a little bit more stable, but it's just like, you're not addressing the problem. Yeah. You're not addressing why the soft plaque is there in the first place. You're just trying to cover it up, sweep it under the rug, sweep that soft plaque under the rug by calcifying it, right? Which is not a good thing. The reason that a statin drug will calcify soft plaque is because it really messes with fat soluble vitamin transfer, because that's one of the things that lipoproteins do. LDL does. It helps the body deliver these fats, such as triglycerides and cholesterol and things like that, which is these fat soluble vitamins, A, D, E, and K, are transported via those things. And so vitamin K is what's responsible for taking minerals and depositing where they need to go. So putting them into bone and teeth and things like that.
And we're talking about K2, right?
K2, yeah. And if you create less K2 around, then it's not taking that calcium and minerals and things and putting them where they should go. And there's more left around for the body to decide to calcify the plaque, which is fine. Like if that plaque's been there long enough, the body's just like, well, we're not going to get rid of it. We'll just calcify and make it less dangerous, so to speak, even though we talked about the studies that show the soft plaque, if they rupture, the vast majority of the time, it does not result in any type of cardiac event. It's just inflammation happens there, and then the body heals that and just makes the stenosis a little bigger. So yeah. But that's just the total reverse way. It's just treating and covering up the symptom rather than addressing why are we developing plaque in the first place. And so plaque is clotting tissue. Okay. So clotting tissue, just like if I cut my skin, right? What happens? Clot forms, scab goes over it. That's clotting tissue, right? Same thing happens in an artery. When the artery gets damaged and it can't repair itself because there's insulin resistance, and insulin signals growth and repair. So if there's insulin resistance and there's this inflammation that's damaging the lining of the artery, it's damaged the fourth phase water, it's damaged the phrenic cartilage, and now it's gotten all the way down to the artery, then it can damage the artery. And lots of people don't know that the artery and all blood vessels have a blood supply. So there's arteries supplying the arteries. And so if that damage happens to the lining of the artery, it can start bleeding. And so to prevent it from bleeding, clotting tissue forms. And that's exactly what we see. Like if you look at studies that analyze plaque, they find that 87 plus or minus like 3 or 4 points in either direction of the material that is plaque is clotting tissue, fibrotic material. So same thing as scar tissue in the body somewhere, it's this clotting material, this fibrotic material. And then there's also some calcium present. There's also some, they call it cetaceous debris, things like that. And there's some LDL present, but it's no more than just got enough that got caught up in the process of clotting. And it just happened to be around. It's very small amounts. There's some smooth muscle cells, there's some macrophages, and there's white blood cells and things, but the majority of it is clotting tissue. The body is forming clotting tissue to repair this damage, right? To prevent this damage becoming a bigger issue, right? And so yeah, I mean, that's what's happening. And if you look at studies that analyze, like they try and induce atherosclerosis in areas, and they measure, or they kind of observe what happens during the formation of atherosclerosis, they say that fibrotic clotting tissue plays a role in every single stage of atherosclerosis development. They don't say cholesterol plays a role. They don't say oxidized cholesterol plays a role, or levels of ApoB play a role. They say fibrotic clotting tissue. So then we have to ask ourselves, what would tell the body to develop clotting tissue? And that is damage. Just like if we damage our skin, or we damage a muscle, we get scar tissue, right? We get fibrotic tissue. It's what the body does. The same things happen in the lining of the artery. So then hopefully people will ask, if you're wondering, well, how do we prevent the formation of clotting tissue, right? And that's decrease the things that cause the damage to the lining of the artery, which could be poor flow, could be like electrons, energy, could be toxins, and different things we talked about, that insult the lining of the artery. And then to cap it all that off with insulin resistance, which impairs the ability of the lining of the artery to prepare itself normally, then it has to do something else, which is to pocket clotting tissue. That's what's happening. And so
there's a first, so let's make sure we understand this. There's a first line of repair that would not necessarily have to include clotting tissue and plaque to form. There's a first line of repair that for that artery is insulted because damage happens, bends in the arteries happen, blood flow restricts, and blood flow can be interrupted. Inflammation happens because we eat, because we move, because we get stressed out, right? Inflammation happens, damage can happen, but there's a first line of repair that doesn't necessarily involve the formation of clotting tissue and these plaques. That's what you're saying. But it can be impaired by different factors, one of them being insulin resistance. And I would assume an interruption of that fourth phase water that is lining the artery.
Exactly. I was just about to say that. Exactly. So
okay.
It's those two things. Exactly. So let's say we get this stressful event that happens, and we're just, our clotting tissue, the inflammation is super high, and it damages some lining of the artery. Like that's just going to happen. And that's going to happen. That's why the endothelial layer is so thick of cells. It has some resilience, but we can get to a state where that's not it. But wear and tear is normal, just like your car. It doesn't matter how much you take care of it. There's going to be wear and tear over time. And the ability to repair that wear and tear is what's essential, right? And so if we get this damage, it damages the fourth phase water, it damages the vitrectomy, it damages the endothelia. Well, if we're doing the right things on a regular basis, like getting sunlight, and grounding, eating the right foods, and managing our stress, then after that inflammatory process happens, the fourth phase water builds back up, and it allows the endothelium to heal because it's stuff its buffer, like its protection area, so that the endothelium should heal. And it heals because insulin is signaling it to grow and repair, right? So that's how this normal process was happening. It's supposed to happen our whole life, and it's supposed to keep those arteries healthy. But even if they do get damaged, like I said, the body has mechanisms, the collateral arteries, like it's got all these things, it's amazing. The body is amazingly resilient. And it just goes to show how far off track we are that we can't, even that resilience isn't preventing us from getting issues, right? So yeah, and then that insulin signaling, which is why diabetes, type 2 diabetes, is so heavily associated with higher rates of atherosclerosis. It's because you're insulin resistant, and the endothelial cells, and I talk about papers on this in my book, are dependent on insulin signaling to grow and repair. And if you don't have that, or those cells are resistant to the insulin, even though it's there, then that doesn't happen as well. And it's more likely to get damaged, and that damage can perpetuate the and clotting tissue instead of naturally repaired mechanisms.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
Because the clotting tissue is a better short-term solution than an artery bleeding, right?
Right. No, it's first aid. It's essentially first aid when you can't heal and you have a wound that won't heal. And it really explains why type 2 diabetics often have wounds that don't heal. They're so insulin resistant, their cells. I mean, and so you think about this, we talk about it, people think, is that really true? Is that really insulin resistance keeps it from repairing? Well, we see that in type 2 diabetics where they have their wounds do not heal. That's a standard symptom of type 2 diabetes, or wounds don't heal. And it's because of the insulin resistance not allowing that repair to take place. What happens inside us as well on a regular basis with all the soft tissue. And so,
and the Western medical approach is if your foot can't heal, you got to also cut it off. Right. We don't need that anymore. Okay, you got some atherosclerosis on there. Let's not talk about why it's there, what's causing it. Let's just stent it. Make it bigger, right. Which doesn't address the problem at all. And certainly doesn't create a new environment for it not to continue to happen. Right. Right. Yeah. Definitely.
And so to go back to the vulnerable plaque, because like you mentioned, very few of them, we say very few. It's like reading this paper, I think I read this right, that for an individual soft plaque, that alpha-roma, that thin cap fibroma, it's the percentage on a yearly basis of one rupturing and causing a clinical event. Like they rupture all the time, but for it to become a clinical event, it's like a 0.06%. 0.06%.
Yeah, I couldn't believe that number. I was expecting it to be low.
Am I reading this right? Yeah, you're right. I read that 4 times. I was like, wait a minute, 0.06% per atheroma per year. So, okay, not for the lifetime, but in a year, they may rupture all the time. They do rupture all the time, but only 0.06% become a clinical event in that person in a year's time.
Yeah.
Which means that's almost statistically insignificant. Like it could almost be, for some people, 0. Like it could rupture their whole life. They have atheromas or fibromas rupturing their whole life.
Yeah.
And they will never, ever, ever have a clinical event. They will never have that plaque break loose and cause a clot that creates some sort of coronary event.
Yeah. It's
the majority of people.
Paper. Yeah. It's an absolutely fascinating paper.
It really is.
Yeah. I mean, it just goes to show that, I'm not saying that, okay, well, if you have an angiogram and you got stenosis there, it's fine. Don't worry about it. And that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that we don't need to focus so much on that. Like that's an indication that you've got inflammation and maybe poor flow and things like that are creating clotting tissue, which is not what you want. Right. Because that could create a bigger clot somewhere else that could cause it a bit. But treating the lesion area is not important based on everything this study talks about. And so,
which is what they're trying to do with the statins by solidifying. That's why I'm going to get to the acute attack on it currently now is to, let's take a statin, forget about all the risk factors associated with statins. You can Google those and see the list is long, including insulin resistance and including an impairment of the production, because you're impairing cholesterol, the production of the K2, which helps reverse K2. I think you mentioned in the book, K2 interacts with a particular protein in the artery to actually reverse plaque or keep soft plaque from becoming hard plaque.
Exactly. Yeah.
So we have a process with a nutrient we need that actually keeps plaque soft or reverses it.
Yeah.
But we're gonna we're going to do the opposite of that with a medication to prevent heart disease.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's totally backwards. It just goes to show that the line of thinking is totally backwards.
It's not natural. That's it's not the way the body heals itself. It's not thinking in the way that the body heals itself.
Yeah. And, again, we have to take into account the financial backing in these studies and these procedures. And you're not going to put millions of dollars into something unless you're going to get billions back. And so that's just how the process works. It's kind of a result of being a capitalist society. There are some very nefarious things that happen and, things that do more harm to people than good. There's been billions paid out in lawsuits and everywhere. But for these companies that make trillions, paying a few billions in fees it's not going to change the process, right? So it's a way to set up, and we got to be educated consumers. We have to know these things, which is why I wrote the book and put it out there so that people will have this information so that they can make better decisions when faced with this and know that, just because the doctor tells them this, it may not be the best thing for them. It may just be best for that system. We have to be aware of that stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's really, it was shocking to me to see, and the contrast between what a statin is doing and what our body can do when put in the right environment. The K2, like originally infrared, grounding, all those things will help the body heal without plaque formation, without the clotting materials. And it has a natural function to keep plaque soft. And I would assume even reverse soft plaque into no plaque, which is what you found.
Yeah. It keeps it. If you talk about these stages of reversal, if you get to calcified plaque, it's a longer process and harder process to get back to right. Quote unquote unstable or soft plaque, to healing the artery and no. So it's a bigger process. So instead of going the direction of healing it, they're pushing it toward the quote unquote lesser of two evils,
Right. But it's a great, yeah. They're not considering the fact that it could reverse itself. They're saying it's either going to be unstable and a potential risk, or we solidify it and we have a different type of risk.
Yeah.
And so they're saying we're choosing this risk over that risk, but this risk we can monetize.
Yeah. And that's their exact thinking. Because I've been to lectures where cardiologists say, well, we can't really reverse this. And then, even my vascular surgeon, when I reversed in my leg, he was just like, well, we don't really see these things reverse, so we can't really say it. And I was like, you're looking at it, and they just, if that's the line of thinking that these things cannot be reversed, so we might as well make it less harmful.
Yeah. We have that study. I mean, there was a study it was in a, I can't remember, it was in a heart, it may have been in a heart, or I can't remember which one it was. I think it was in a heart study. Now, where you're talking about the K2, and you look at K2 at reversing soft plaque. And that was in some sort of journal regarding heart disease. I can't remember which one it was specifically.
Yeah.
And yet you don't see that. You don't see that in New York Times. You don't see that in the news. It's still meat, saturated fat, all these, and really let's push the statins.
Yeah.
$1 trillion drug. And then of course the insulin resistance, we're seeing more and more of that the statins actually cause insulin resistance. And I think I saw a couple of papers that said it increased the risk of type 2 diabetes by one was 9 to 10%. The other was 10 to 13%.
Yeah.
And some people
definitely know it creates insulin resistance for sure, because it damages mitochondria or a fundamental level. That's what statins do, because statins, cholesterol, mitochondrial cholesterol. But yeah, I mean, and when you affect, and I go through this in my book, I literally outline, or I give you the different steps of making cholesterol. The statins interfere with that second step, which means that you don't get cholesterol in the end, but you also don't get any of the intermediate molecules that are used to make cholesterol. And so your body uses those intermediate things just as much as it uses cholesterol for different things. So one of them is dolicol, and dolicol is used for the health of the insulin receptor. So if you don't make cholesterol, you don't make dolicol either, which means you don't have something that keeps the insulin receptors healthy on the cells, which leads to insulin resistance. So that's why statins do that. But there's also different intermediates that play a role in production of antioxidants in the body. It's a selenoprotein. So that's just going to help. That's going to make you have more oxidative stress and inflammation, right? And you don't have those. So there's all these different things. But then your body also uses cholesterol, and muscles use it. It's why people on statins get muscle pain. myopathies. The brain needs it, which is why statins are associated with cognitive decline. It's just crazy. All this so that we can stabilize the plaque that's not even causing the issue in the first place. It's just crazy.
Right.
You're creating all these other issues for this person when the cholesterol wasn't the issue, and then the thing that you're trying to harden now and make less of an issue. It's not the issue based on this paper, 0.06%. It's crazy, and this information is just not put out there, and you just got to be educated. You got to ask questions these days.
Well, demonizing cholesterol, haven't we seen the reduction of what's considered normal cholesterol for a human change over the last 60 or 70 years? Where at one point total cholesterol and even LDL was above 200.
Well, we have no idea what normal is because
we don't know.
We haven't.
No, but I mean, even in the 50s.
So, we have no idea what a human living out in nature, eating their natural diet, what their ideal cholesterol level is. Because we've only been measuring it since maybe the 40s or whatever.
Right.
And so, but yeah, like in 1984, they put together this committee to decide whether cholesterol was good or bad. And they decided it was bad for whatever reason. It's a bad research or whatever. And so then they put together these little, groups of people that went to educate the doctors about what cholesterol should be. Right. And so when they first came out, they said, LDL should be no lower than 200 or no lower than 250. I can't remember which one it was. It was
220. I remember when it was 220.
Yeah. Yeah. And then the pharmaceutical companies got wind of this and they were like, so they went in and they sponsored the lowering of this recommendation. They went in, they infiltrated these groups and these committees who were deciding what it should be. They sponsored their events. They provided them with research, so to speak. And so over the years, it went down to 200 and then it went to 150. And now it's supposed to be 100 or lower, which to me, he says, we have no idea what it's supposed to be. If we can just change the number willy nilly like that, we have no idea. And, because we never really taken cholesterol, on cholesterol numbers on a population that's not living in a very modern Western society, right? So once we do that, and we get that number, then maybe a better idea. But if you look at, there are studies that, like associational studies that you can't really draw any concrete conclusions from them, but there are studies that show that the total cholesterol levels associated with the least all-cause mortality from everything are between 200 and 250. Which is above the recommendation. And the total, or the LDL cholesterol levels that are associated with the lowest all-cause mortality of anything are between 100 and 150. It's like around 150, which is above what the recommendations are to have it. So, and there's some cardiologists that think it should be lower than 70, which is where the highest all-cause mortality levels are in anything. So again, those are just associational studies, but interesting.
With that one mention, it was like 12 million people.
Yeah, big studies.
It was significant.
Yeah, a lot. So it's. I hope people hear this and they're just realizing that the research is not being followed. We have evidence for these things, and there's I think there's about 700 citations in my book, and I've found a lot more since then. So
sure,
and not that I base everything I do off research, because there's major flaws in research, but if people want that kind of validation, there it is.
Right.
It's there. And that's what Western medicine is claiming, that it's evidence-based and everything, but it's ignoring all this evidence and just paying attention to the evidence that they want to. So we have to be, again, educated consumers.
True. I appreciate it. Yeah. And I think that flows down to everything, like you said before, and we were talking before we all started about the ApoB, for instance, which is the big, looking at ApoB and powerful numbers. And we're still chasing a number or a measurement that in and of itself, isolated, has little to no impact on what's actually happening. But to even then look at why is the ApoB suddenly higher? Why are triglycerides up? Why did your cholesterol jump from here to here? And is that a problem? And those are two different questions, but we're still treating symptoms that we're accusing the symptom, like you said, made cholesterol the bad guy. Let's treat the symptom that may or may not be the bad guy. Forget about looking at what's actually causing the problem farther upstream. And that was your reference to Einstein. It's like we have to change the way we think about it to look at where's the root cause of this problem. And I don't think we can rely on our current medical industry to do that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Einstein also said that insanity definition is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. Right. And so that's what we're doing. We're trying to test these lipids, maybe in a different way. We're trying to analyze these lipids in a different way and expect us to tell us something different. But it's never going to. It's never going to magically one day just give us the answer. Oh, this is what we should be doing versus this. Like as far as like indication of risk, like we could say small dents and oxidized LDL and ApoB versus total, or ApoB versus ApoA, or LP little a, all these different forms of lipoproteins, and try and assess risk, and maybe they tell us something. But if all those things are happening, these small dents, oxidized, whatever you want to do, particle size, particle number, if those things are happening, it's because they're symptoms of something else going on, right? And those things that are going on, the inflammation, oxidative stress, the different things, the lack of light, lack of grounding, that kind of stuff, those things are creating this situation that's causing atherosclerosis and lots of other things in the body. And they're also causing these imbalances in lipoproteins, because the lipoproteins themselves are not a driving factor in the disease. They may contribute eventually. If they become damaged, they can contribute to damage anywhere else. But they're not what's driving it. It's the things that create those things that you drive. And so, yeah. And so, because people talk about like the lean mass hyper-responders and how you eat on the Atkins diet and your cholesterol skyrockets, total cholesterol skyrockets and everything. And is that good or bad? And I would say, well, it depends on you, right? It depends on what else you're doing. Are you building toward phase 1 on the line of your artery? Because if you are, then it's intact, there's no inflammation. And that's going to protect you regardless of what any lipoprotein level is. But even if lipoprotein is high and it's not there, body tissue is what forms a line of artery, So it's just all these different factors of inflammation. And it goes back to me, like instead of, you like to overanalyze and focus on all these, testing and all these different theories and things like that, or this research that can be flawed and it has shortcomings and everything. It's like, when I step back, and I like to look at all that stuff, I think it's interesting. But the way I base my health strategy day in and day out of life is I kind of ask this question, what is real? Because all those things are kind of like hyper realities, things that we're taking as more real than what's actually real. And hyper reality, like the example I gave is the Weather Channel. Like they got the green blobs flowing across the screen. That's where it's raining, right? And I can't tell you how many times I've looked at my phone to see what the weather is, and it's not what it says is going on outside. What's outside is not what's happening and what's on my phone, right? And so these are hyper realities. And so it's the same kind of thing. We can take this research and medical information, these theories, this biochemistry, things like that. And those are all interesting and they can give us insight, and we've used them over the years, but they're kind of a hyper reality. So when I think my health strategy, what's real? Real light, real contact with the earth, eat real food, not man-made food, not food that's been invented by humans, eat real food that's been around for a long period of time, have real social relationships, instead of fake ones or very superficial ones, which social media tends to create for us, lots of things like that. I focus on what's real, what's been real in humans' lives for since humans have existed. Those are the things that are very likely going to create health. And the other things, you can get bogged down in that stuff and create more issues than you solve. And so we kind of step back and ask ourselves what's real. And this is kind of a good baseline guidance tool to use for, is this health strategy going to get through?
Awesome. That's great, Stephen. That's a great way to put it. Well, once again, let's give everybody here and listeners your contact information, resourceyourhealth.capacity. That's Stephen with a PH, STEPHENHUSSEY on Instagram. And check out Understanding the Heart on Amazon and Audible. Thanks again for digging deep with us, because this is like, there's so much to go through here. And you've really unpacked a lot of it for people who've either never heard it before or just had a few questions about, these things like ApoB, and statins, and what they can actually do in their life to prevent these things. So it's like, and just understanding the formation of heart disease. I think most people just don't have the grasp of what you just explained. So thank you again for kind of taking a real complex subject and simplifying it so that the rest of us can get that and be educated and be empowered to like you did, ask your doctor questions and think about, whether you have an event or not, just in your journey of prevention of disease. It's like you have an educated point of view or standpoint to what questions to ask, what you think is good for you, and make those decisions for yourself rather than just trusting in this system, which we all have to agree is highly flawed.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So I think I
ask
appreciate
questions,
you.
be educated.
Yeah. And empower yourself with information. And I think that's what you've done with this book and with what you're doing and with your app. Heart Source? What is it?
Heart Sense.
Excuse me. Heart Sense. So that sounds like a great resource as well. Well, thanks again, Stephen. I appreciate you taking the time. I know we went a little long, but man, we covered so much.
Yeah,
so,
that's good. Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely.